T minus 30 seconds. T minus 20 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Okay, possibly episode 4. I don't know if I've been keeping track. We got Tim Bailey on this week, and I've got William Philippek to help out. I'm looking forward to this one. Okay, guys, so right off the bat, I'm going to let you know. If it starts raining and William, I go away or I go black on the screen, you're in charge completely until I come back.
Yeah. I might go black too. Remember, we're both have this storm.
I know, but your internet's probably better than mine. So,
maybe.
We had a storm today, but it's gone. I should be good.
All right, we're gonna get through this just fine. So, first off, Tim, I appreciate you coming on. I'll be honest, I've been talking to William for about 6 months about me and him maybe co-hosting an episode, and honestly, you seem pretty fitting for the first one. So I'm pretty excited about this one.
Perfect.
So, I like to do a little recap, man. You got in the industry around 2002? 2003.
Yeah.
What was the first thing you bought that you considered an investment getting into the hobby?
Ooh, investment. Man, I'm gonna get it confused on what the first one was. So I know I bought a normal ball python female in 2003, and then started raising that up. Kind of got like, hey, I might do some breeding. And I want to say it wasn't probably maybe 2 months after I bought that first one. I went to another little tiny local show that doesn't even exist anymore. It was in a fireworks stand, and I bought another normal female. And then probably about a week after that is when Marine Corps called me and said, "Hey, you're going to Afghanistan." So I talked to my wife. I was like, "Hey, can I buy one more? And so I'll have 3, and you can grow those up," because I was supposed to be leaving for 2 years. It's like, you grow those, I get back, man, I'll have some animals almost ready to breed. So had those 3 normals, left, went to Afghanistan, was there for 6 months, and they changed how they were going to work our rotation. So they sent us back home for 6 months and then back. So in that 6 months back home, I bankrolled a bunch of money while I was over there because I wasn't spending much, so I could save a bunch. So when I came home in 2004, went to Daytona, and so I don't remember, but I know that year when I went back to Afghanistan the second time, I think I had 12 ball pythons. So I bought like 9 while I was home. And the 9 I bought, if I remember right, I bought an albino male for $2,000. I bought in Daytona in 2004. I went to Barchak's table, got introduced to Brian. I bought an Axanthic male for $4,000 from him, and then a Het Axanthic female for I think $1,500, and a Het Pied female for $1,500. I bought also at that show, I bought a hypo male and a Het hypo female there, and then I want to say I think a hypo male at that time was like $1,200. The Het hypo female was like $750. So that was like the initial thing. There was like 12 snakes in there. So some hypo stuff, some Axanthic stuff, some albino stuff, had a Het albino, and then a Het pied female to grow up. And I might have bought a Het pied male too. I don't remember. But so I'd spent like about 20 grand and had about 12 or 15 ball pythons to leave to my wife. She took care of them for the next 6 months while I was in Afghanistan, and then came back. And then bought a few more things there. And then pretty much there in 2005, bought pinstripe male for 20 grand. So that was the first real big one. But I mean, still, when albinos and hypos and Axanthics were $2,000 to $4,000 a piece, that was still somewhat investment back then,
I was going to say, so like back then, there was a lack of availability. So, you were limited on what you could buy, but, there's still a lot of codoms back then. Did you go all recessive because the price point was actually lower than codoms, or why'd you go so recessive early on?
No, because it's funny you say that, and that's where I'm losing track. So somewhere between 03 and 05, I bought a pair of pastels, I bought a pair of cinnamons, and I bought a pair of Mojaves. So I had those in the mix as well. So I did have some Kodam stuff. I don't remember all the ordering on that, but I'm pretty sure I bought all that recessive stuff first, I think. But I may have had the pastels there in 04 too. I'm pretty sure I did actually have those pair of pastels. The cinnamons and the Mojaves I might have bought in 05 after I came back completely and had gotten out of the Marine Corps. I may have got that. I may have bought those then. I don't remember. But I like the albinos because they were super popular at the time. I've been an Axanthic fanatic ever since day one. Anything gray and black I love. So that worked out well. And then I've been a hypo fanatic as well for years. So matter of fact, I bought my first pair of double het True Ghosts while I was in Afghanistan, saw it on King Snake, called the guy over here in the US and paid $6,500 for a pair of double het True Ghosts that ended up not proving out, but along the way produced all the animals that produced all the ghost stuff I have now, somewhere in there. And he actually ended up taking really good care of me, after I tried to breed him for 3 seasons and produced a bunch of Axanthics, never produced a hypo out of them. So never, and then it sold the double het male by that point in time. So I made something else, never figured out if it was him or the female. It wasn't. Ended up, I think, selling that girl and ended up proving out some of the possets that I had kept out of that stuff. But he sent me a bunch of other animals that were more than fair value to cover that loss. But I think I had like 3 years of production with no Axanthics in there. But anyway, I bought those two. So a hypo and Axanthic I've been a fan of forever and still have a bunch of that stuff running everywhere in my collection.
That's cool. It's funny because I think back to like those days of buying stuff, because I think back then I bought like a het albino male and a het albino, or a pied het albino, or a pied het male and an albino het male. I want to say they came from Ralph and they came with certified paperwork.
Oh yeah.
And it seemed like back then, in the early days, people were getting fucked big time on hets.
Oh
and
yeah.
That like about 8 years ago, it kind of stopped to the point where like you didn't really get like certificates with your stuff anymore, no receipt, like everything seemed on the up and up and people were getting less fucked. And then it seems like people went back to fucking each other again very recently, because I've been hearing a lot of hets that aren't proven out.
Yeah, I wonder, so I had my first experience with that this year. I sold an animal to a guy that was Axanthic het pied. I mean, had train track markers. I knew exactly what I bred to that female. It's one of those, it's a double het female. I produced her. I've only ever bred her to my Axanthic pied male. That's it. So I'm like, but he got it shed tested. He goes, hey, this thing's not a het pied. And I was like, well, all I can tell you is I know it's a het pied, but go breed that thing. And if it's not, then hey, I've been around 20 years. I'll still be here in 3 more years. I'll take care of you when we get to that point. But I don't think that's going to happen. But and I brought that up on Facebook because I was just curious how many other people have had that happen where they sold something that they were pretty confident was definitely het for something, and then shed test said it wasn't. And I'm like, hey, I'm going to question the shed test from my perspective. How many other people have potentially known animals that tested negative, whatever. But someone did bring up a good point is, hey, if and this was a female, if that was a Partho clutch, then hey, it might not be. Or maybe you did breed it to something last year and you didn't. So and we're kind of here now. I know I've heard Dr. Booth, Warren mentioned it a few times lately that he thinks Partho is way more common than we ever thought it was. So I wonder in some cases if there's not people selling what they truly believe is a het and it's not because it was a Partho clutch, or maybe retained sperm. I haven't heard retained sperm discussions a whole lot lately either, but I had a boa that I know for a fact I had never seen a male in 3 years and produced a litter, mostly stillborns, but there were 2 live babies in there. That's sperm retention for 3 years. So that's another possible variable. I have no doubt there's people out there that are scamming and being shitty, but I wonder in some cases, if some of that's not happening. But, and I quit giving out paperwork years ago too, but I kind of got to that point. It's like, hey, I don't know how to tell you to trust me, but if you don't want to, spend a little bit of your time, go look. I've been here 20 years. Go find out what my reputation. I quit doing it because I have a reputation that I can back it with, But if you don't, I feel, and I've said it for years, I always feel bad for any new people coming in the hobby. spend $40,000, $50,000 on some animals, get some production, and they're trustworthy people, but it's hard for them to sell because you can't buy a reputation and you can't get it overnight. It's earned over time, you know, and so they may have some struggles, but it's always been that way. That's not anything new.
No, and like you said, reputation goes a long way in the hobby, and you know, you're established enough that most people who work with you don't think it's just not necessary. And then, you know, to your other part about, you know, the way you're talking to customers, tell you the truth, I've got a similar thing myself right now. I actually got to call the guy because I just got the report back and I haven't even filled him in yet, but I'm probably gonna have to call him after this. Hopefully he's not listening. I sold a Mojave GHI Het DG Pos Het Hypo. And it was also Pos Het Pied. Well, it was a holdback female I ended up selling to the guy, and it ended up getting tested because he wanted to know about the hypo part, and it came back negative for DG, negative for hypo, but 100% het for pied. So I was like, you know, this doesn't really make any sense to me. And, you know, back to what you were saying a moment ago. So I went back in my breeding records. In the year prior, I bred a pied tour. The second year, I bred a spot nose DG het pied het hypo. Spot nose has always been kind of hard for me to pick out, and there was a lot of GHI in there, so I thought I just had bad odds on GHI, or it might have been mixed in some of my Mojave GHI combos. So again, it was a holdback. I ended up letting it go, found that out. Told the guy to breed it. He was going to go hypo DG combo to it. He bred it. There was an animal in there that looked like a visual DG. So we had the baby that looked visual tested, and we had the original mom tested again. Mom came back negative het for pied. And the baby came back het for DG, het for hypo, and het for pied, but not a visual DG, even though it looks very bright. I'll show you the picture when we get done. But so now I got to correct it, of course. And, you know, I told him the whole way through, just like you, I trust my breeding. Do what you need to do. If something goes wrong, we'll come back to it. Well, now we're coming back to it. So, you know, you'll see what happens on your end too. But shit does happen. What do you do after it happens, you know?
No, and I mean, that's to me, that's the end all be all. You know, that's where, to be honest with you, I've told a couple of people before in the past, hey, you know, you get 5-star reviews and everything's great for forever, and you never get a bad review, you know, that something went wrong. I'd rather have nothing but bad reviews, because then people can see, how do you handle the bad things? Because that's really all that anyone's ever worried about. I ship you an animal, it dies in shipping. How do I rectify that situation? That's all that's really important. You don't need to hear that I shipped 500 animals and nothing died and everything was perfect. It does tell you I probably know how to ship an animal, but it doesn't tell you how I actually deal with a bad situation.
No, 100%. And I will say that over the years, people that have been put in bad situations are so used to getting fucked over. When anybody does even a little bit, they're surprised.
Yeah.
So like I said, depending on how you deal with, you know, the way these end, it's going to be different. But I don't know, man. We all got our own set of morals in the hobby. We live by them. You really can't teach people morals. But let's go to something fun. And, you know, William, I know we're talking a lot. You're going to contribute soon. Don't you worry. No, not yet. No, not yet. I didn't say no. I didn't say no.
Try not to be rude.
No, you're not being rude, buddy.
It's one of those.
No, you are talking a lot, though. Yeah.
This reminds me of the three of us at 5 o'clock in the morning in the parking lot at St. Louis. I think Will just listened for like 5 hours, and we just.
Was that the sperm talk?
Yes, that was.
All right. Well, how about that? That's actually a good segue. So I sent you guys the link the other day of the artificial insemination and the pine snakes. They did that at the zoo. I already forgot what the locality was. I don't know if it was like a weird state, maybe like
Louisiana pines.
Louisiana pines.
Okay.
Pine snakes. I don't know why I had Kentucky in my head, but I should have looked at it again before we did this. But nonetheless, our conversation, you know, we don't have to get in detail, but we probably spent about 4 or 5 hours debating artificial insemination of ball pythons.
Yeah.
If that technology was there, what our thoughts on it were, and we both took a side, and again, we made William listen for about 4 or 5 hours. So what is your opinion? Because, you know, I like talking about like where the hobby's going or things that can change. Do you think artificial insemination would actually become part of our hobby, or do you think there's just too much of the fine print that we just don't understand yet, as in what it'll do to the hobby?
You know, I mean, I wouldn't mind having that discussion again, because it's hilarious that was probably 4 or 5 years ago that we had that conversation, maybe. Oh, yeah. And I think that conversation would sound completely different now. And I only say that because I think I'm not the ball python market is dead guy, or that the investment aspect of the hobby is gone and dead. But I will say that compared to 5 years ago, that investment piece is nowhere near the same. And to me, I think the only way you really get that artificial insemination piece to work as a saleable project is if there's an investment grade section, sector to the hobby. If it gets to a point where everything's not super expensive, there's no reason to buy $100 straw of sperm to artificially inseminate something if you can go buy said animal that produces it for $2,000. It's if those animals are 10, 20, 25, 40, $45,000, then all of a sudden that's an animal you can try to sell sperm from, that people will buy that because they can't afford the animal. But hey, 2 shots of sperm may be all they need to be able to produce something from it. So it's almost like they're just buying 2 breedings. But the high end market, I think, determines how that potential market would even look, and does it work and does it not. I actually forwarded that article right after you sent it to me to my buddy, who was the one that told me he thought he knew how to do that. He's a vet buddy of mine. He's like, hey, I think I can do this. That's what spurred me having the conversation with you, because when he told me that, I go, dude, this could really train wreck the market. If we can do that. So I sent that to him. He goes, yeah, I saw that article. He goes, but he said, what I really think when I read that is, I wonder what went wrong. I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, they only had 3 successful animals out of that. I said, well, that's better than 0. But yeah. I mean, hey, I don't know that it talks much about, they made 100 attempts and were succeeded 3 times. So, but the fact that they did it means you have something to build on. And, the next step is, hey, can you do it more reliably, repeat those repeatable results? And then can you get repeatable results, and what's the cost to be able to do it? So it's all those pieces still have to come in line before we'd even have to worry about potentially seeing it come into the market. But I still think it's fascinating and an interesting discussion. And if it truly comes to be, it's an interesting way to breed animals. You end up with, back to our discussion, you end up with people who have a facility full of females and don't own a single male.
No, exactly. And we went into detail about that in our argument back and forth about, just where the failures could be in it, the way it could crash through the markets. But, the problem is a lot of these discussions, most of these are about, ball pythons. And let's bring this into ball pythons. But, I see more value in that when it comes to maybe some mutations that we can't ship into the country anymore that might be in Europe.
Or just fresh blood. Or just fresh blood. If you want to get new Angolan blood, I mean, hey, go get some, sperm in Africa and get new Angolan blood here.
Yeah.
or insert species here, anything.
Yeah. And no, I agree with all that. And, I guess the way I look at it is, I'd want to go to like another market that incorporated that with inbreeding in animals, where they started doing the sperm thing, and find out how it changed their market. There's plenty of animal trades that have been doing that well beforehand. I'd be curious if some of the guys who were there during the transition, what they saw. But again, it's a very different market, because I know it's used a lot in cattle, a lot in farming. High-end horses, I guess, would be the market you'd have to look into when you could sell 1,000 of the sperms compared to anything else,
You can, and I mean, hey, I'm surrounded by stud farms. I mean, it's like Southeast America capital, horse capital of the world is where I live. There's stud farms everywhere, and that's what they do. I have another buddy that does it with goats. He sells goat sperm for show goats, but I know they definitely do it for thoroughbreds.
They do it with dog breeds too, like French and all dogs that can't breed on their own. You got to artificially inseminate them. So, yeah, they do dogs too.
I didn't know they were doing it with dogs.
Oh yeah, bullies. Oh, some of them are just ridiculous. $20,000, $30,000.
Yeah,
and they can't breed on their own. You got to use artificial insemination for them.
Well, and then some of those can't even birth on their own. You got to artificially inseminate. Then you probably got a C-section, huh?
No, that's why they're so expensive.
Oh shit. I knew about the surgery at birth. I didn't know that they did artificial insemination also, but I guess when you look at the body structure of the animal and some of those breeds, there's probably no way they could breed.
Yeah, they fall over if they try.
Yeah, that's wild. William, and your thoughts, man, like you were stuck in that 4-hour conversation. In the end, what was your take after having to listen to us talk about sperm for 4 hours?
I think what Tim said with like Angolan pythons, I think it'd be pretty valuable. I think that would, when we were talking, I know me and you were talking about it with Australian animals. I honestly think it'd just be easier because Australia is not going to let anything out that's anything animal related. Skin, blood, sperm, egg, that dead or alive. So, I mean, we'd be better off just trying to actually get animals out of Australia rather than just trying to get sperm. Because
hey, what makes you think that? Just out of curiosity, why do you think they wouldn't let sperm out? I mean, I think to me it's an easier conversation to get them and convince them to that than an animal. But I mean, I didn't know if you knew of some other reason why they wouldn't let that out.
I think it's a blanket ban because it's just easier to just ban it all rather than just banning a segment of it or pieces of it. Kind of like why it's silly that they don't export. I mean, that's just ridiculous why they won't export. I can see why they don't import animals.
Right.
So it's easier for the government to say, well, fuck it, we just get rid of all of it or we just won't let them do any of it. I think it's silly. I'm not saying it's right, but I'm just I don't know. I
get skins too, because then you can't confirm that someone's not killing animals to get the skins. But like to me, a sperm is man, you're not killing anything. You're not taking animals from the but I get it. It's blanket ban. You can't do it. But I don't know if you can't have that argument and go, hey, you can technically generate a market, create income, create revenue from something that doesn't harm the population or the animals, because there's no reason to kill them to get it. You kill it, you only get one batch of sperm. And then you're done.
My thing is, even with the animals, I mean, if you export the animals, look how many people are smuggling out ball pythons.
Oh, yeah.
What they're ultimately worried about is people stealing their animals, like the 800 shingleback skinks that get smuggled into Japan every year. And it's like, well, look at ball pythons, for example. How many people are smuggling out ball pythons? I think that's a prime example of why exporting could help your wildlife.
Yeah.
If regulated right, it could seriously help. So,
well, what do you think the benefits are of Africa shipping out 40 or 60,000 baby ball pythons a year? We talked about the families they feed. What would you say is the benefits for Africa by doing that?
What, just exporting?
Well, Africa exports 40,000 ball pythons a year, I think, roughly, maybe 60,000 worldwide between Europe and the United States. What do you think Africa benefits from that? Because, the argument is that, maybe letting some of these animals out, Australia could benefit. What do you think how does Africa benefit in your eyes?
I have no idea. They just started doing it, and I don't really see they say I don't know. I saw the Dave Kaufman thing about the whole if we don't export them, they'll decimate the population. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, look what we did in the U.S. I mean, we did it to a lot of native stuff, and I don't necessarily think it would decimate anything, but I don't know.
No.
I think it's wishful thinking is why I guess that they say that. I don't know.
I guess I hear where you're coming from. Like, of course, and with the Africa thing, it is a good example. Just at the same time, I think everybody's going to look at it a different way. And I know the one argument of deforestation, like, these villages are going to keep their forest there if they can be benefited by taking an animal out and sending it out of the country. But the moment we stop taking those animals, well, they need to turn that land into something else that's going to feed them. A lot of them will burn their forest down. A lot of them will start farming in these areas. So there is benefits in that. But, again, kind of arguing with the whole idea you have Australia, I don't know if they have any issues over there with deforestation or anything like that. I don't know if they're keeping a closer eye on their environments.
Referring to smuggle.
I get that.
800 shinglebacks a year get smuggled, and that's just to Japan. That's not including snakes, other lizard species. Is
that a real number?
Yeah, 800 just to Japan. You don't keep track of this, Dave. You're the skink guy. Come on.
Well, yeah, I don't do shingles, but I respect. Well, I guess when you say 800 a year, the only reason I think it sounds like, wow, that's crazy is we never saw any of them come here, really. Populations in the United States, I bet you there's no more than 20 shinglebacks in the United States. And up until recently, we could get things in from the European market, and a lot of the stuff that goes through Asia gets here. So if 800 are getting out a year, you would think more than half of those would be targeted to make it to the United States eventually.
you would think, but I guess if Casey Lazick's selling them for like, what is it, 15,000 a pair, and I'm sure Japanese are seeing that, and they're like, well, 15,000 a pair, or 15,000 whatever locality or subspecies you're into, and if you're only getting one baby, maybe two babies every couple of years, I don't see too many people being into that compared to like the blue tongues. I think it's less of a reproductive benefit than it would be to do northerns or easterns. I just think they see value in doing it.
I think last thing too, and this is an argument in your way, but there's a lot of people that I think it was 26 or 28,000 blue tongues get killed on the roads every year in Australia. So there's even people that argue, why not export these animals? You're losing 26,000 a year already, kind of thing. Like, it's a weird argument. I've heard a lot of angles on this, but so back to sperm, Tim. I heard years ago you could get horse sperm out of Australia and sent to other countries. Now, I have brought this up to people, and I should just Google it, but I have talked to some of the Australians, asked if they knew anything about that, and most of them felt like that would be illegal too, but I agree with you, it shouldn't be.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a market that, again, you can generate revenue and generate a market for something that doesn't harm anything. And I was gonna say to the argument y'all having a bit ago is, some of the places in Africa where they're shipping some of that out, that's the only thing some of those people have, like you said, before you start deforesting and growing, because you have to make money. I think that where it's slightly different in Australia is if you had a market, you take that away. It's not like that's the only thing you can do in Australia to make money. There's so many other options. It's a slightly different story there. But but I'm with you there though in that. Hey, why would? And I'm not saying it's $1 billion freaking market and the taxes off of it. The government makes a ton of money in Australia, but it is a revenue stream that you can create that doesn't harm native populations or wildlife by just letting sperm out. That's to me, turn your lawyer brain on, where I can see you can make an argument that, they can still say no, but you can at least present that argument and potentially win and get the ability to do that.
You're saying, so, the comment you made earlier about how, the industry is doing just fine in a sense because, like every 5 to 6 years, I find there's a panic mode in the industry.
Oh, yeah.
I think we're just in our panic mode, and some of us have never had a chance to panic before, so they're panicking a little hard. In your opinion, because you have seen all the sways in this market, you don't necessarily think that the market would end because people would necessarily stop buying animals that they wanted to try to turn a profit on. You feel like it's more the laws that'll get us eventually?
Well, there's definitely a big piece to that. I mean, I know we were talking before the show started a little bit. We've got some legislation in Louisiana that's in the works, and I had one of the Louisiana Fish and Wildlife people over here, and this law is really there's a couple of species that they're potentially gonna outlaw, but the biggest piece of this legislation is cage sizing, and what they initially presented was going to be extremely detrimental to anyone that had any sizable collection, because you were going to have to change out everything and get gigantic enclosures. I know Phil called me last week, and we got the new verbiage from them on the changes they made to what the cage restrictions are going to be. I went back and forth with Phil on that. We looked at some stuff and then actually presented one more suggestion to try to make it a little bit better. And apparently the lobbyists they had in place were able to get that done. I don't want to go into details. Phil said it hadn't been public put us into the public yet, so I won't comment on exactly what it looks like, but it's way more beneficial and way less impactful. But I mean, hey, to answer your question, yes. I mean, I think legislation is going to be the bigger driver in this next boom cycle for us. When we get out of this panic mode, the legislation piece is probably what's going to drive a lot of what shapes the market for the next 5 to 10 years. I don't doubt that at all.
No, and I couldn't agree more. William, William likes his Australian species. I love my Australian species, but I'm only limited to a couple. William, how many Australian species do you think you have in your house right now?
Probably every Australian species you can legally get.
Okay, tight. Good answer, man.
however many that is, most of them.
Okay, so with that being said, I'm sure you're in the same boat as me. I can't even export my skinks to Europe anymore.
Yeah.
Can you do any of your dwarf pythons, or is that all off limits now?
That monitor's got X-nayed a couple of years ago for it's like a Fish and Wildlife just decides if they want to do it or not. I've gotten weird. Some people say I'm going to talk to my UK buddy, and that's all I would hear. So I don't know if they have some kind of inside guys they talk to who kind of, close a blind eye to the, if someone's importing or exporting, Australian animals. Some of that stuff, it's like, how do you really know? Because you can do like carpet pythons. You could do, these are Papuan pythons, carpet pythons. And if you don't know, you don't know. You're not going to, unless you genetically test them or something on a molecular level to see what, clade in that group they match up to. No one's going to look that deep into it. And same thing with like water pythons, spotted pythons, a lot of stuff. So, but yeah, it seems like it's they seem like they're more strict on it now. Like Don Patterson, he doesn't send anything down here anymore. He used to send groups of different Australian python. Well, shoot, geckos and skinks too, but he X-nayed all that too.
So, I think if you're breeding Australia, or if you're breeding Australian species in the United States right now, as long as you're not mass producing that species, your market's probably going to be just fine in the United States. But if you're a guy like, let's say me, that plan on producing a couple extra skinks or a couple hundred extra skinks to ship to Europe every year, well, when that got taken away, completely changed my market. 100% of my sales have to be stateside. It actually made me change the whole idea of producing a lot of blue tongues and being more selective about them. But, as long as you don't have too much of an Australian thing, I think you're fine. But losing that hurt, like big time. So, the United States, it seems like the thing we do is we say, yes, you can send it out. Well, it used to be that way. But, some stuff we just don't want to see coming back in. Well, these are all like just what ifs, but do you think the United States is more prone to say no more coming in or no more going out?
I'll tell you, I'm not 100% sure that this argument doesn't circle back to what Will was just talking about. Is that I think it's easier for them to just make blanket statements. So I don't think it's a if or. I think it's a both. I think it just says, hey, they don't come in, they don't go out, then we don't have to deal with it.
Okay.
Because they don't want to.
I got one other topic to kind of throw in here. You see how we're talking about blanket statements? This is directed towards you, Dave, you bastard. You know how we're talking about hybrid shit? Now, would it just be easier to just say, you know what? We don't know if these are burn balls, retic balls. We'll just ban it all. It's just easier. We'll just get rid of all of them. If we don't know, it's easier just to ban it all than it is to, all right, we're going to test this to see how much percentage. This is why I'm saying hybrids can be dangerous. When they start taking a lot of these species like they are, especially with pythons, maybe not so much with lizards, but I'm talking especially when you're talking about pythons, when literally almost all the pythons can breed together. You can breed African to Australian, Indonesian to Australia or African. So, I mean, like I said, I can see this being a huge issue by doing that.
So one thing on your whole crossing pythons from different continents, I do agree with you that yes, that could be done. But Bill Albright brought up a really good point to me when we were talking about crossing like womas and other pythons. You treat the eggs very differently on a lot of these different python species. So trying to figure out the right way to incubate some of these could cause an issue when you start hybridizing them. I agree you can hybridize them all, but I don't think it's going to work for them all. But the argument that's being made in my community right now for blue tongue skinks is what happens when we start taking like the Indo stuff and we start breeding those Indo mutations into Northerns. Now, when we have heavy Indo blood, now that stuff can legally go in and out still. Does that mean I can legally export an albino blue tongue skink if it's got heavy Indo blood? Do you think that's a negative?
Well, I've heard of some like Cameron when he was importing the Papuan carpets. The first time he did that, he got a lot of kickback from Fish and Wildlife because they're like, "Ooh, we don't know if these are Australian." This is, I think, before they knew carpets were found in West Papua or anything. So, and even the same thing with the spotted pythons, the water pythons, things that are found in the southern part of New Guinea and the tip of Australia, a lot of that stuff can be kind of blurred lines because they're genetically and identical looking for the most part. You know, there's no real distinction between them.
Well, let's go blanket statements then, and this one's for you, Tim. So the ball python industry really is the fuel of the fire in the industry, I've always said. Like, you know, the ball python industry is a huge part of it, whether you like them or not. If we found out we couldn't import another ball python, do you think we'd be okay as a market? Or do you think more or less what I'm saying, how about this? If we can't export or import anymore, so no more new mutations, and now we just lost all our overseas customers, does the ball python market last?
Well, yes. With the caveat, does the market last? Yes, it lasts. What does that market look like? That's a completely different topic. You know, what do you have a bunch of people breeding? I mean, you can't support, I don't even think you can support 50% of the numbers of what we're being produced now if you don't. So you end up, I think, with a lot of people that have, you know, 2 and 3 and 4 year old inventory sitting around because they just couldn't move it because, you know, you're limiting your customer. So, I mean, I think it changes dramatically, and you're going to get a ton of people that don't want to produce a ton of stuff because it's harder to move.
Well, then how about this?
I think the export piece definitely hurts the market a bunch if we can't export anymore. I mean, you just think about the numbers that go out, you know, of the country.
So maybe we couldn't live.
We kind of already even saw it when Asia kind of, for lack of a better term, Southeast Asia filled up with balls. You know, they bought stuff for so many years like crazy, and then, you know, you don't see near the numbers going there anymore. So once you saturate a certain area, you know, or I say saturate, not necessarily saturate, but they have what they need now to breed. You know, you've built that franchise, for lack of a better term, over there. Now they make all their own stuff. They don't need near as much. So you saw that market dry up. So you just shut off that complete export piece. I think the market really gets cut to the kind of numbers, you know, that are being produced.
I do agree with, you know, here's one thing too, which I thought about when you said that is, you know, what's happened over the years, it seems like the trends have started in the United States and then the European market started growing. So I think like the late 90s, early 2000s, the Europeans were buying all the best leopard geckos, all the best balls they wanted, all the best boa constrictors. And I've always joked around that the reason Europeans look like they're making better geckos and better boas is they've line bred them better than us because they were only buying the best of the best for years. And what happened after that market exploded, like you said, the Asian market started exploding, and we had Japan coming in big on the market. So, you know, if you could predict what country is next or what country has not actually got in the breeding reptiles for a living, I think Russia might be one of them. I don't know what the rules on that are anymore, but if you can find a country that hasn't actually started the trend yet and you got in there and created the trend, you could do pretty well for yourself as an exporter.
Well, until how this discussion started is the U.S. says you're not exporting anymore.
Yeah.
And then you're screwed.
Yeah. I don't think we're ever going to have a reptile-friendly politician that's ever going to really even give us the time of day. I just don't think there's a reality there. It would be nice, but again, here's the thing. I don't think the government would just look at it as reptiles. Like you said, when it comes to a blanket, are they putting all exotic pets in the same blanket, or do you think it's dogs and cats being added to that? Because that was always the scare in the hobby that, you know, they're coming for your snakes, but eventually they're going to come for your dogs and cats.
Yeah, and I mean, I just, you know, you have to bring Florida into the discussion when you have this discussion, and I just, you know, because that's the template and that's what everyone looks at. But I mean, I wonder if what really drives it is not even necessary. I think exotics is the best way to put it, but I think that the piece there that's important is they're just looking at invasive species and what invasive species does. So, hey, let's just freaking blanket no exotics because they just get released and cause problems. You know, so that's where that blanket comes from. Is, you know, you look at all the things. I mean, you know, some of the invasives that are in Florida aren't really even like crocodiles that are freaking have breeding populations down there now. That's not a species that even came out of the hobby. I mean, there's hardly anyone in the hobby keeping a crocodile. You know, I don't know where that came from, but
is it the Nile crocodile or the Florida crocodile? Because there's a native Florida crocodile. I've heard Nile crocodiles, I thought.
Yeah, no, I think there's Niles there.
They could survive. They can handle it cold, so they could survive in Florida. That's the scary part.
Yeah.
I heard there was an episode of Joe Rogan months ago where they were talking to that one python hunter down in the Everglades. And it was interesting, but I think Niles came up in that conversation a little bit. I'll have to find that clip. I think I shared it one time, but nobody saw it for some reason. But it was a unique conversation. I'll send it to you guys, but I'll post it in the comments on this on my page. But yeah, the Nile thing down there is kind of freaky. I mean, the first day they're having some like airboat out there and they come across the giant Nile. I think that's going to change a lot.
Oh, yeah. But I mean, so that's where that's where this legislation is going to come from is fear of an invasive species getting loose and then no one understanding exactly what it's going to impact. So that's where you get people that are just nervous, don't know, don't have the time or want to spend the time to go research and figure out what that impact is going to be. So let's just throw a blanket over it. It's way easier to do that, and then you're stuck with people who should be free to do that, but can't because it's such a small enough population that they can't drive change in legislation. I mean, that's to go to USARC. I mean, everyone thinks USARC is an important piece of this discussion, and nothing against USARC, nothing against Phil. The organization does great things. Phil's done fantastic work, but Phil will tell you it's the lobbyists that we're paying is what's really helping us. The lobby is how you adjust all of that. And I mean, if you don't understand how the cattle industry works, they have the largest lobby in DC. It's ridiculous the size of that lobby, and that's how you get it done. It's the lobby. But so if you don't have an organization, you don't build your own lobby, then whatever you're doing, you're gonna crumble under trying to fight that as a small group of people. You can't do it.
All right. This probably came up on a conversation in another episode one time, but you probably remember this in the early days of USARC Florida or down in Florida. I think we were actually going against the cattle farmers down there because I think they were claiming a heartworm from the Burmese python could be transferred over to cattle, and that's where they're making like a really big deal. But if I'm remembering this right, and maybe I'm not name dropping the right guy, but I thought maybe Bill Brandt got involved in that and maybe sided with those guys. Now, I don't know if we paid them off, but do you remember anything about that or heard that side of the story?
No, I don't remember any of that. But I'm not arguing because I know whatever there's a water disease that cattle got that came from ticks, and I think those ticks can come in on turtles or tortoises, I know there's a vector there somewhere, and I don't know if that's the exact same argument as that, but I don't remember that one. But
okay, I'll have to research it. I'm confident.
You're talking about is what that Pinto. Oh my god, I can't remember its name, but it's a worm that gets into Burmese pythons and can affect native colubrids and kills them because obviously the worm that can sit in a full-grown Burmese python is going to be quite a bit different than in a 4-foot water snake or snake or something like that.
That was the Georgia argument, right? That's how they got it banned in Georgia because they were protecting the eastern indigo.
Well, it was Florida, and then I heard Wisconsin had a problem with this. I don't remember what happened. All it takes is you to release a pet that could have, or not a pet. A pet probably wouldn't have it. Any kind of wild collected animal, if you got a wild collected animal and you were so happen to let it go, or even if you let it outside and it interacts with other species, if it's able to, that worm or whatever it is able to get into the native species, it can cause a bit of mayhem. And that was the worry, especially with Georgia. Florida was another one, especially when you have like the eastern indigo, endangered species like that. They're worried about those contracting that.
So it's a good loophole and it's a good argument and it's definitely lawyer talk. And just what I mean by that is, I watched this thing with RFK from, I want to say like in the 80s or 90s, and he's talking about saving the redwood forest. And he's chuckling at the fact that they used an endangered owl that was native in that forest to protect the forest. When the host pushed back and said, hasn't it been proven the owl could live somewhere else? He said, it doesn't matter. We won our case and we saved the forest. So, I do understand. And here's the thing. I am sympathetic. If we have something that's going to kill off every eastern indigo in Georgia or could possibly cause that, a non-native species that we introduced, you got to be compassionate about that and understand we are kind of in the wrong. I've never really even known how to properly regulate this because, back to what you said earlier, Tim, I've even brought up the fact that, Europe has the regulations on cage size for your animal. You bringing that up as even being a Georgia thing for a while there, that was one of my, give an inch so they don't take a mile. Maybe something like that is a way to give a little bit so they don't take everything. But if you don't mind me asking, you might not be able to give this detail. Cage requirement changes in Louisiana. Can you say how long the snake versus how long the cage, or is this all? You could say no.
That's exactly what it is. I won't give any of the numbers Phil said, but yeah, I mean that's exactly what it is, and it's like there's actually they actually got turtle and alligator farmers involved in this a little bit too, because they did start talking about turtles, and so there are some requirements for turtles and sizes for them. When you look at those numbers, it's almost ridiculous. Like we don't have much to worry about there. Then they split the way the rest of the legislation is written is it's snakes over 8 feet have this requirement, and snakes under 8 feet have this requirement. And when I was talking to Phil, we tried to think of all the snake keepers, arboreals and terrestrial snakes, and how all the sizings would apply to any of those. And I mean, I think what we have now is kind of what you said to me. I'm like, hey, in some cases, I can't argue with the fact that I think what they're putting in place is to keep the people who are really keeping grossly negligent, and wrong, trying to fix that problem. But, at the same point, I know specifically when, and the guy that came over to my place was the chief economist for Louisiana Fish and Wildlife, the one that came over here. So we talked through all kind of stuff, and really we're talking about dollars. What's the economic impact of this legislation to me? If y'all institute the legislation tomorrow, what does that look like for my business? I'm like, well, it's probably going to cost me, $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 to replace all of my caging. I'm gonna have to get rid of this many animals because I can't fit that many animals in this space requirement anymore. But in some of it, it just came up to, hey, this size snake, here's the enclosure you need. And it was funny because I actually pulled out some I don't remember the freaking cage numbers anymore. I suck at all that stuff, but the little hatchling tubs in an ARS rack, I pulled it out and I was like, hey, to someone that doesn't know any better, that's a really ball python. It's, very big for that cage, because I've got some 700-gram ball pythons in hatchling tubs, because the minute I put them in something bigger, they quit eating. So I put them back in that small tub because they'll eat, and then I move them up when they're comfortable doing it. But some species are going to do better in a tight environment and in a tight enclosure because that's what they want, and others won't. So it's still, that legislation is difficult to write, because I can tell you that, a 3-foot long ball python and a 3-foot long corn snake are going to have slightly different requirements on what they want, because one moves all the time and one never moves. So, it's completely different. But yeah, I mean, it's essentially, it's the way it's written right now is snakes over 8 feet, here's how the cage needs to be set up, and snakes under 8 feet, here's how it needs to be set up, and dimensions. And that may, I don't think it's going to change again. I think we know what the final is, but I just don't want to, talk about any of those numbers at this time, because it was, I shouldn't. But I think the way, it was good discussion. And I think at the end of the day, we got some regulation, which is, like you said, it's a little bit of tug of war, a little push and a little pull. So we got some regulation in place that I think keeps them happy and is probably somewhat good. Are there going to be some fringes of people that are going to be impacted by that? Absolutely. But the bulk majority of people, I think it's not going to impact very greatly what they currently have, and what they can do moving forward.
Yeah. Well, one last shout out before we move on. So Tim, you were at the Daytona auction, am I right?
Yes, sir.
We talked to each other for a minute in the back. First off, what a great time that auction was. Again, shout out to Steve's Morphs. The bike donation, probably one of the coolest back and forths I've ever seen in an auction.
I missed about 90% of that auction. So how'd that piece go? I missed. Where'd the bike go for? I saw it, but I missed that.
It was beautiful, man. So it started as a back and forth, I believe, with Babu and Junior from JMG. And I want to say it got up to like $10,000 or $12,000 between the two of them. Now, at some point, Timberline jumped in, and I'm pretty sure, man, I feel bad now. I'm pretty sure that closed at $20,000.
Nice.
Yeah, so it did a big bump really fast, and then they gave the bike to Chris at the end, which was very, it was really cool to see, But no, the back and forth on that bike, because, the week leading up to it, we were kind of talking about it in a podcast, like, what do we think it's going to go for? Even talking to Steve at the show, like, it's like, I hope 5,000, but, man, the more I looked at that item, I was like, this is special, and I thought it was going to go for a lot of money, and I think overall at the auction, they might have did $117,000 or somewhere in that range.
Yeah, that's the number.
Yeah, no, so I think that's amazing. And, it's just cool to see that because, when you hear people complain about the market, I remember back in the auctions when the market was truly slow, you didn't see auctions like that. It just wasn't happening. So to see a number like that while you even had people in this market saying it's not a good market, I think that's a good reflection on the hobby.
Oh, no, for sure. I agree with that 100%.
Yeah. So someone's got to top that bike, but man, I think it's going to be a long time for somebody tops that bike.
You gotta come up with a good idea. But it's been hilarious to me, at least, to watch auctions over the years to where, nowadays the big ticket items in auctions aren't rare animals anymore. It's not cool shit. It's stuff. Someone that has some cool idea. It's some crazy bottle of liquor. It's a piece of artwork. It's a bike, a blanket, a freaking picture of freaking Potter with a dildo in his butt or something, whatever. That's what makes all the money. It's not animals. People used to donate, rare animals or the first one for sale in the world to auctions, and you don't see that hardly anymore. So it's been a shift in how those auctions work, but it's interesting to see that, the kind of stuff that's getting auctioned off that really brings the money now is interesting.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And, I did that one thing, I think it was a couple Timleys ago. I donated the poop in the box. So Potter could tell the story about taking a shit in a box at Daytona. Now, of course, I believe Darian bought it, and he did $1,000, and it was a very charitable amount. I'd spent 47 cents making it. But, the thing is, and when I gave it to Brian, I said, you're going to have to really sell this shit with the story, buddy. Like, the story is going to sell this piece of shit. And he told an amazing story. Everyone was laughing their ass off, and it was cool. But like you said, it's just the vibe that we have there. People willing to spend a little bit of money on fun items. It's not really about the animal you take home. And I think, oddly enough, the last big animal that went at auction would have been the lemon frost leopard gecko 6 years ago. And again, that was... Yeah, Junior from JMG going back and forth with Steve Sykes.
Yeah.
And in the end, Steve got that animal for $10,000.
Yep.
We all know how that finished. And if you don't, it's a great story. Go find it online. All you got to do is Google it. But that was the last animal I remember going for more than a few bucks at an auction.
Yeah.
So, hey, William, if you don't mind me asking, bud, did you prepare for this? As in, if I let you do this for a minute, you got some stuff you want to talk to Tim about?
Oh, absolutely.
You go ahead. Let me sit back for a second.
That makes me more nervous than Dave asking dumb questions.
No.
Come on, it can't be that bad, can I?
No, you're fine, buddy.
I just have no clue what field it's coming out of.
I feel bad Python talk right now that I'm shocked Dave didn't just open up with. So, rod iron. What's up with the eye? Is any more information come out about that, or?
So yes and no. So I'll say I think most people probably know that Ernesto Hino's got some wrought iron stuff. Ernesto is a amazing individual when it comes to looking at details and detail oriented. It's crazy, but it's kind of been a three-way triangle there. Me talking to Tracy talking to Ernesto talking back to Tracy, feeding kind of back to me. But Ernesto had a clutch last year from a wrought iron. So Ernesto did buy a wrought iron from me. The first year I sold any, I sold two. I sold one to a local customer of mine. I sold one to Ernesto. What's funny is those two animals both actually came out of my super wrought iron clutch. I haven't posted a lot of this just because it's really long stories and I don't have time to I don't want that to sound horrible. I don't get online much. I'm way too busy with work and all kind of other crap that I don't have the time to be able to answer questions in a post. And I know these posts are gonna ask a lot of questions. But the entire super clutch, so all of the supers ended up dying pretty quickly. Then after that, I know at least 1, 2, 3, 4 animals from that clutch that weren't supers have died. So one of them, and I think the first one that died was the T positive albino wrought iron that was produced in that clutch, which I had. I went and looked at it one day. Something looked funny. Lo and behold, it had an enlarged heart. And ended up dying from that. So I had my vet buddy come over, looked at it. We ultrasounded it, did a whole bunch of work for it. He actually was looking at it before it died. It died a few days later. But he saw the enlarged heart and blood flow concerns in there. So then lo and behold, I told Ernesto and my other customer that had bought one, told them about it. And sure enough, I don't remember the order now, but both of those guys' animals died. Both of them had enlarged hearts as well. So I don't know if that was part of that breeding, just because my two original wrought irons from Tracy are 3 years apart, but technically siblings because they have the exact same parents. So, and that's why I haven't bred them together to try to make supers again until we get a little bit further away. But the only animal currently that's surviving out of that whole clutch was a male wrought iron from that clutch. And it was the one that actually had about 90% coverage of the scales over its left eye. So that one I didn't want to sell. But the other reason I didn't want to sell it is my vet buddy was over here when we were looking at a bunch of those things when they were little. And he goes, "Hey, Tim, do you mind? Do you want to?" He was over here actually doing some surgery on one of my boas. He goes, "I got all the stuff here." He goes, "Dude, I'll clip those scales off the eye just so we can see what happens. Do they regrow? Do they do anything?" I said, "Man, let's go for it." So we cut those scales off the eye. That one, and I've noticed, in the past, that it seems that the animals that have about 50% coverage of scales or more, which has only been in that one clutch. Any of the other clutches that have had scale issues on the eyes, it's like very tiny scales, typically subocular on the backside of the eye, and it's like 1 to 3 really tiny scales. But that super clutch was a mess all the way around now for who knows what reason. But it had 90% coverage. And so I noticed after that, I went and looked at some of the ones that had 50% coverage, like the supers. And if it had about 50% blockage of the eye from those scales, for whatever reason, those scales were actually attached to the lens. So if it was less than that, those scales kind of free floated on top of the eye. So that one, when we cut it, that 90%, it was attached to the lens. So we damaged the lens when we pulled the scales off. And then that lens, after it shed again, never came back in fully right. But anyway, so I knew I wasn't going to sell that animal. I'm not big on euthanizing animals that will eat and defecate and act normally. I probably have about 10 or 12 animals here that some people probably would have euthanized a long time ago, and I just don't want to. But that's one of them. But the kicker there with that animal, and this story is going to go somewhere in a little bit, but that animal, because I was keeping it, I just grew it really slow. I'd feed it every 2 weeks. I'd feed it something small, so it stayed small. Well, it lived longer than anything else. And my theory there was the heart issue became a problem when the animal reached a certain size. And when it got to that certain size, it put additional work on the heart, and that's when the heart got enlarged and had problems. So this animal was half the size of everyone else's when they died. And so this animal is actually still alive. It's now, I'm feeding it better. It's actually bigger than all the other animals that passed away from that clutch. So I need to get my buddy over here, do some ultrasound and look at that animal and see, is there something weird going on? But who knows what's going on there. But as a result of that, The following year, I'd only produced one female that I could get rid of. And so that went to my first customer that bought one that died. So I gave him that animal as a replacement for his. I didn't have a replacement for Ernesto, but Tracy sent Ernesto a ready to breed male, kind of as the replacement for that animal, that had passed away from me. So Ernesto bred that animal, and I forget to what. I don't want to say, what it was, because I don't remember what it was. I'll get it wrong. But he bred it to an animal, and him and Tracy had some discussions, and he kind of had some of his own methods on incubating stuff. And so he had incubated that clutch a little bit cooler. And when it hatched, also, he was, I'm horrible, I don't know the scientific term for that, but after the female ovulated, he actually, I don't know if he lowered it, but he's keeping his animals a little bit lower temperature. So we know that temperatures, and especially even while the eggs are still in the female, those temperatures can affect eye development. So we don't know if that's a part of it, but incubating eggs cooler. So now I'm putting fewer eggs in a tub so that they even don't get as warm near the end of incubation when they start sweating and generating heat to soften the shell so they can cut out. But he incubated that clutch cooler, and all the wrought irons in that clutch he produced were all perfect eyed animals. So this year will be the first year I had the opportunity to do that. I only have one clutch this year. I was hoping for two, but my 007 female, I bred to my wrought iron male. She didn't go this year. But my wrought iron female, my original girl, she did go this year, bred to my 007 male. That clutch, I incubated cooler, and everything in that clutch hatched perfect eyed from a scale perspective. I did have one animal in there that had some fungus on an eye, which is completely unrelated to that. But far scale issues, no problems. Ernesto produced another clutch this year. I don't think he's gone public with that yet, so I won't say anything. I'll let him, do that when he wants to. But 2 years in a row now, he's produced animals with no scale issues. So we think we may have figured out how to get around that problem just by incubating slightly cooler and keeping the females slightly cooler after they ovulate, until they're ready to deposit eggs. So, and slightly cooler, by a few degrees, just keeping them closer to like 84 degrees, and then keeping the eggs, in the incubator. So my incubator is probably set, I think these days I'm running right about 87 degrees. But I put all my blood python clutches down on the floor. So and I have a walk-in incubator, so the whole thing's heated up. But I put them on the floor because that's going to be the coolest area to incubate. So they're probably 85.5 down there, something like that. And that seems to work. So just a few degrees cooler seems to have resolved that issue. So we'll see if that continues into the future. And then, I still think there's some opportunity to try for some supers again. But I think it's just being very selective with which two animals we pair together to see, if we can fully determine that is or isn't, a lethal combination. I hope it's not, because those animals are just phenomenal looking animals.
Yeah.
So
I thought
hopefully,
that project was, honest to God, I think it's better looking than the pie, to be honest with you.
yeah. There's some people who've probably seen an animal that I brought around last year that I thought was a wrought iron goldeneye.
Yeah.
After the clutch this year and some stuff Ernesto shared with me, we have now figured out that was actually the triple gene. So that animal that I have is actually a goldeneye wrought iron matrix. I made some goldeneye wrought iron this year, and they don't look like that. They're not as extreme. So that one actually has matrix in it. And I've been meaning to get a new picture of that here soon. I've been traveling and going crazy for the last 6 weeks, and I'm kind of settling down. I got 2 more trips to do in the next 2 weeks, but I need to get some pictures of that. I got a couple other things blood python wise I got to get pictures of too for some people. So hopefully I'll get an updated picture of that thing put out here pretty soon. And that's a female. She was kind of runty and started out a little slow, but I mean, she's doing really well now. And but it's going to be a little time on her before she's ready to breed, since it was a female. But I'm excited for that. And I mean, I still think there's so much to be done with that. Ernesto made a T positive albino wrought iron last year, I believe. And I told him, I said, hey, you're going to love that thing, because I liked it for the year I had it. It's a phenomenal looking animal. So we start getting some more of those out there. Who knows what it's going to look like when we get TNAG into it. Who knows when we start, plugging some other stuff in there. And now now that we think we may have figured out some of the issues there's a lot more excitement in the industry and the market and other people that were wanting that project, I'm now not as shy about trying to plug it into pied. So, I mean, that's probably something that's going to happen in the next year. I'm going to try to get into some of the pied stuff and see if I can't get some wrought iron head pies. So I think that's going to be ridiculous too. So a ton to be done with that. And I mean, a ton of excitement around that project. And I you know, good segue into that. So, I mean, part of why I had a great Daytona, I brought one wrought iron female with me to Daytona. And that thing got so much attention. You know, that's the only one I brought there, but I did sell it and then ended up selling the other 3 animals that I had at home while I was in Daytona. So all 4 of the wrought iron animals I had for sale were sold in probably a 48-hour period of time, and I need another 10. So, you know, it's getting a lot of excitement. And matter of fact, I messaged Ernesto earlier today and said, hey, we need to talk just so I could pass on to him some value that I had on those animals so he knows what to do with his stuff. And so I think Ernesto may, I don't want to speak for him, he may sell some stuff this year too. So there still may be a little bit more available this year to anyone interested. But it's, the blood python market has been exciting, at least for me, for the last 5 or 6 years. I'm stoked about that for sure.
I think this is isn't the wrought iron probably the first dark, like truly dark gene in blood pythons as far as
that. And black smoke, you know, Tracy sold the black smoke to John Dyer. So John's got a black smoke. I don't know how much more he's done with it, but it's darker.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. I love the project. And, you know, one thing I was thinking about when you were talking about that, at least a couple things, is first off, yeah, there were a few boas in the early stages of production where the supers didn't do very well. And since then, we've actually gone back to it. And one of the projects I need to go back to is the Marin project. If you don't know the Marin, it's almost like a blood boar, a maroon Colombian. And long story short, the supers that were made were not viable. I want to say Jeff Ronnie got a male. He tried for 9 years to breed it. It wouldn't breed for him. But we said that about a few other projects. We've now gone back and had success. And I even think back to the early super spot noses. They were wobbly, helicoptering really bad. I've seen a lot of power balls nowadays that don't look nearly as bad as they looked back then. And a lot of them don't have wobble at all.
Yeah, I've seen some power balls, and I'm like, hey, one of those animals I told you I probably should have euthanized long ago. I've got a 2011 Powerball in my rack now that was for sale, and I've never sold him. He's 13 years old, and he looks like a helicopter every time you open the cage. But he's 13 years old. He eats, does great. I've never tried to breed him, but, I mean, he's horrible. And that one animal right there scared the shit out of me, and I've never tried for him ever since. But then, lo and behold, you know, I've seen some people with Powerball stuff. I'm like, what's wrong with those people? Do they not know any better? And those animals don't have a problem. So, no, I'm with you. But I think that comes back to getting some more outcrossed animals before you run back to pair them together. So, I mean, I think it's a matter of one of those, hey, I'm probably may end up buying some wrought iron stuff back from one of my customers that's outcrossed it a couple times before I go try back to make supers again.
Have you thought about imports just to have outcrossed blood that you know is unrelated? Because I think that's a big problem. And just reptiles in general, people think a lot of this stuff's unrelated. I think that's why we see so much Partho and stuff. These big ball python collections, they think their collections are super outcrossed. But if you're popping out Partho, that's a sign that your collection has a fair good amount of inbreeding going on.
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't have any import females anymore. I probably ought to pick one up, but I'm actually this year. I bred them 2 years in a row. This year, I haven't figured out if I'm going to do my wrought iron male or my wrought iron female, but I have a pair of martyr bloods, you know, that I know are, you know, they're martyrs, but I mean, that's just normals that are line bred for that red. But A, I think the red may help the wrought iron. B, I know that stuff is relatively outcrossed. So I was going to put one of my wrought irons to one of my martyrs this year just to try to make some, you know, nicer wrought irons, but also get something that's a little different. But again, no matter if I use my male or female, they both have the same parents, so I can only get so far away from what I have without, you know, freaking getting something, you know, from someone else. Potentially even something that Ernesto sells to someone, because at least I know that male is as far away as you can get, even though it came from Tracy. But, you know, everything's going to go back to the single original animal. But you know, I do want to, before I try for supers again, I definitely want to try to make sure I'm real particular about picking the most outcrossed animals I possibly can before I pair that back together. And I'm not 100% certain that I really wouldn't mind trying to find an animal that doesn't have albino in it either, because I'm still not 100% sold that the albino piece may not be contributing to some of that as well. So both of my original animals are het for T positive. So we know T positive, or at least T negs, but we know albinism in multiple species has some issues in all kinds of species. So I just is it a problem in bloods? Maybe not. Is it causing something here? Maybe not. But to try to rule it out, hey, let me get to the cleanest, simplest wrought iron I can get before I try again.
Yep. I tell people all the time, take it from an Australian guy. If you can do it, do it. It can't. Well, it may not hurt. I guess it depends who you're getting it from or through. But generally speaking, it never does hurt to have some sort of outcross or some kind of animals. Shit, I keep wild type ball pythons just for that reason. I see a lot of ball pythons that are starting to look a little, West Virginia, if you know what I mean.
You can't say shit like that on here, buddy.
Yeah, they kind of like Missouri,
Oh,
yeah. That wasn't born here. Yeah, you want to start Louisiana jokes, buddy? Because I don't want to break it to you, man. You got to go there.
Fire away.
Yeah, I hate for one of you guys to track me down if I talk about you too much. But so back to that eye issue, and just out of curiosity, the conversation you had with your vet after you removed the eye and removed the scale and realized it was actually attached to the eye. How old was the animal when you guys decided to do that surgery in the first place?
2 weeks maybe.
Okay, so it wasn't something that over time maybe it started like adhering to the inside of the lid?
No. I mean, this was that clutch was brand new, and I mean, we had talked about that clutch from the year before that had the scales, and so it was one of those like, hey, just out of curiosity, that animal's really bad. Do you want to try it? I'm like, hell yeah, why not? Let's just see what happens. Which, by the way, that animal, I'd have to go back and look. I think that was probably 3 years ago. That animal, and none of that scale has grown back. I mean, you can kind of see where we clipped it. You can tell. If I tell you that I clipped it, you'll go, yeah, I can see, where it was cut right there, because there's still a little tiny remnant of, the scale right there, but nothing grew back. And I mean, that animal's perfectly fine. So that was just an interesting another footnote to write in the book, that it won't grow back. I don't know that we proved anything else from that other than, hey, we can clip it off, it won't grow back. And, I don't know what that means, but it was just another one of those, why not find out, because we have the ability to.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. There's so many dog breeds that they clip the ears, they take the tails off. There's a lot of other breeds of animals. They make small modifications. That was one of the things I was going to bring up to you is, there's really nothing about modifications in reptiles when it comes to physical surgeries. If we ran into a mutation like that, and I don't think that eye thing's going to be as common as it's happening. I think you guys are just in the early stages of the project. I think it's probably going to clear itself up over time. But if there was a procedure where if you produced an animal like that and it was just common to have it clipped before selling it, how do you think that would go over in the industry?
Well, it's funny you bring that up, because part of the whole reason I didn't even want to clip that, and I talked to my buddy about it, I was like, man, I'm going to tell you why I don't want to clip it. I said, because if I clip it and prove that it doesn't grow back, do people get nervous in the future and go, hey, is he selling me a perfect animal that wasn't perfect and he actually clipped it? So it leaves now that I know you can do that, will I do that? Me personally, that's I don't want to put my 20-year reputation online and do something stupid like that. That's dumb. But it opens the door, can you? Now, hey, from your discussion, hey, do you do that? If you'd have asked me that 2 years ago, it'd be a different story. Now that I think we may have unpacked and figured out how to eliminate it, then it's pointless at this point. We just, we think we know how to not produce it. So it's not even a topic anymore.
No, and that's a general statement in any mutation or anything. If we had that small little thing, that caveat, would we or would we not?
Yeah.
And again, they do it in dog breeds. Sometimes it's a functional thing. Sometimes it's a cosmetic thing, but it became very okay in that community.
Yeah. I mean, hey, for me, the other piece of that story, at least that I would add into that, if you're going to have the full discussion on it, is both of my original animals were perfect animals. And until I produced that first clutch, Tracy, I think in one clutch, and she told me, hey, I produced these and it's weird. I don't know what's going on. And that was the year before I made my first clutch. And then I made my first clutch and I made a few as well. But what was interesting there is both of my animals are perfect animals, no eye issues. So perfect animals can produce imperfect animals. What I haven't done yet is breed any of my imperfect animals to find out, can an imperfect make a perfect? That I don't know. I don't think that's been done yet at all. And I do want to try that at some point in time. With that said, the interesting piece to the whole, if we can prove that imperfect animals can throw perfect animals, then that to me leads me to a point of, hey, I know you can clip that scale and it won't harm anything. So to me, I'm not going to do it. I'll sell an animal that's got some scales. And then, hey, if the customer wants to do that to their own animal, knowing that, hey, I can clip it off because it bothers me, so I'll clip it off, but I know that that imperfect animal makes perfects, then, hey, that's completely up to them to do that. And so it's hilarious you brought that up, because I don't know if y'all have ever heard of this, and if you haven't, go YouTube it. It's interesting. But plastic surgery, for lack of a better term, on koi is hilarious. Dude, they go and they get these people that come to their house to do multiple different cosmetic procedures on koi, like they'll split the tails between the bones in the tail. They'll split the skin and then it regrows, but it makes the tail fan out a little more. They'll pull certain scales out to make the scale, shapes a better, more perfect shape. They were doing something with like puffiness in the eyes and hitting it with needle. It's really crazy to think that they're doing that. So, hey, I'm not beyond knowing that if we find some mutation that has some issue, will cosmetic surgery, quote unquote, move into our world as well. And some of those guys doing that stuff in Asia on koi is like $1,000 to come do that to your fish. So, hey, I guarantee you there's a vet or there's someone out there that won't mind coming to your reptile collection and doing some cosmetic procedures and walking out the door with $400-500. So that's a whole other market that will be interesting to see. But yeah, I think at this point, I mean, it's like, hey, the cool piece of data that I could put in that footnote is if you clip it off, it won't grow back. So that's knowledge for someone that wants to buy an animal that's imperfect and do that on their own. But me personally, I find, I wouldn't do it. It's just, I don't think that's the moral right thing to do. Either don't sell those animals if you don't want to sell them, or let the person know. And hey, Ernesto bought an animal with some scales on the eye. I gave him a slight discount, told him what was going on. He looked at the animal. At that point in time, I wrote the article with Tracy. It was posted on there. It's like, hey, go read that. And actually, anyone that ever wanted to buy a wrought iron that I didn't know when they came and were interested in something, I would tell them, hey, go read that article and then come back to me and tell me if you're still interested, because I want you to fully understand what you're getting into and know, because I don't want you to call me later on, hey, you didn't tell me there's a problem here. Hey, there is a problem. It's a cosmetic problem. I don't think it's a major issue. So do your homework. If you're fine with it, then we're good. And the same argument when I first made the supers and everyone said, the project's dead because the supers are, a problem. I go, man, there's homozygous animals that are problematic in all kinds of species of snakes in the hobby. And we just don't make those homozygous or super animals. You just, you still, the heterozygous phenotype is fine. So continue doing stuff with that, so that's where we are right now with wrought iron. And hey, hopefully we can figure out that supers or homozygous animals are doable somewhere in the future. It's, with a sample size of one clutch, I don't think we can make a definitive determination on that.
No. Well, here's a question for you, because you're saying I do believe in honesty in sales, especially when there's something like this going on. Would you still have bought the project if it was presented to you that way from Tracy?
Man, that's a hard question to answer, honestly. I mean, I don't know. I will tell you, I bought my female before that was known. But I bought my male after it was known. So, hey, I still bought that. But at the beginning, I have a feeling, I want to say I still would have got it. It's still just one of the coolest looking base mutations. And I think there's so much still to do. It's such an important building block. I think I still would have said, hey, I'll take my chances and get it. And it at least, even if I knew what I know now is, hey, not all animals are imperfect from it. There are animals that are perfect. So, hey, just back to being selective and, just call the imperfect animals, keep the perfect ones to hopefully strengthen that. So I still think I probably would have got it. I mean, that's my best honest answer I can give today. I think I would have. The project
you bought a second one before you even made a penny on your first investment. So I believe you. If you wouldn't have invested more money if you were scared at that point. You already had one. You were still willing to double down.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, back in the day, and I'm not ashamed of talking about this,
Real quick, let me stop you real quick. I do want to say this piece, though, too.
Go.
I did double down, but I doubled down because Tracy said, hey, I'm going to release a male this year. So I had a female that at the time wasn't quite ready to breed. So I didn't need that male. My blood python collection was still regrowing at that time. I didn't really have a need for that male. It was, I don't want anyone else to buy it and start producing stuff on a project that I already spent money on before I did. So I bought it just so no one else could.
Yeah.
So I did still double down because I spent the money, but I doubled down to protect my investment from the year before.
Well, again, and it just kind of backs it up though. You knew there could be a problem. It was presented that way in the sale, but you still had confidence that it was a good investment. I don't think you're wrong. As much as I hear people talking about pied when I have conversations about bloods, I think rod iron comes up in more conversations. Now, I'm not going to say rod iron is necessarily better than blood. I think a blood rod iron is going to be amazing. But, I still say pied is huge for every community. You guys having pied is one of the best things that can happen to your community. It's going to bring a lot of new money in. It gives, it's even more investable now than it was before. But man, rod iron, dude. Like, I can't get enough of that motherfucker. Maybe it's me. Maybe people are talking to me about pikes. I won't let them. Maybe it's because I keep on talking about the rod iron myself.
Man, I'm telling you, that's cool. And in person, the supers, I brought that one super to Chicago, right the year I produced it. And I brought it because I said, man, these things might not make it. Well, I think one of them had actually died before I went to Chicago. I think one died, crawled out of the egg and died instantly. I think one died before I went to Chicago. Then I brought the one to Chicago. By the time I got home, the other one that was at home had already died. And then the one that went to Chicago died 2 days later, probably maybe even from the stress. It was the healthiest looking of the bunch. But I brought it because I wanted people to see it in person. I couldn't capture in pictures, what that thing really looked like. And it was a pretty awesome looking animal. So I'm super stoked about that and want to do it again. But, I think part of the reason that whole clutch, there was some other stuff in there that I think may have been in one, I think there was a matrix, possibly a matrix super in there. It looked silver and black, which got me excited because it looked like an axanthic, so if we can get that thing, if the supers of that are, because I kind of likened the wrought iron somewhat to lace blackbacks or lorry balls, if that super of the wrought iron is like an axanthic-ish looking animal, it'll be cool. But at the same note, I talked to Steve Tillis in Daytona, and Steve has got the potential this year to prove out his, call it what you want. He doesn't even know, anery, axanthic, whatever you want. He may prove that out. So if he proves that out, that'll be awesome too. Because if we can get axanthic, or remove red, anerythristic, whatever you want to call it, from bloods, I think that's going to be pretty awesome. So.
That's actually one thing I find funny about the species, that you guys haven't stumbled across an axanthic or anerythristic yet. Yeah.
No, and I mean, hey, if we have, Steve's had it for quite a few years. He's made production from it that he's breeding back to it. So he has, and who knows if anyone else has. But I'm with you. Although, to be honest with you, I don't think the production of bloods has really been all that high until the last 3 years or so. I don't think that many people were producing that much of that stuff. People were, they weren't, Cameron and they were bringing in stuff from the wild, but a ton of people weren't breeding that because those wild animals are just freaking mean as sin. So I don't think anyone bred enough normals together like we did with corn snakes and ball pythons to pop out recessive mutations just because you got lucky and, you know, found them in there. So I'll be honest with you, I don't think it's all that shocking that we haven't seen stuff to come yet out of bloods, and we're starting to see it. You know, Elijah with his druid stuff, you know, that he thought was Toba stuff, and the Tobas were kind of subtle. And there's a lot of stuff that's come out of the bloods in the last 3 or 4 years with the increase in people breeding those. You know, and the misconception I'm still talking about a lot in shows is, especially people who kind of have been around for a while, maybe got out of the hobby or left and came back and were like, oh man, those bloods were always mean. I went, well, you're still talking about imported stuff. You know, F2 and F3 blood python stuff now it's not a ball python, but it is tenfold better than any of the stuff we were importing out. They're nicer. You know, a lot more people are interested in getting those animals and handling them and dealing with them. So I think that's kind of the explosion of where
I wonder if it wasn't even the wild caught stuff. I wonder if it was just because I remember back in the day it was keep everything fucking hot.
Well, that's guaranteed half of it.
And I tell you what, because of my quarantine rack, anytime, because it's on heat because it's in the house, so it stays the same temperature as any other python in there. So 88, 89. I tell you what, I put those bloods in there. Holy shit. As soon as I put them in ambient 80, 82 degree room, totally different animal.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the real number, the magic number, but to me, 86 has been that number. You get a blood over 86 degrees, it's fucking pissed off.
Oh, dude, it rocket out of the tub. I mean, it was a night and day. It was a totally different animal when I brought it in, and I was like,
oh, wow. For sure. I still think, you know, F2 and F3, and, you know, the further away we get from that wild stuff, it's gotten a lot better even than that. But there's no doubt that was a big piece of it for sure, is that people were just keeping that python species too freaking hot.
Yeah. So last thing I want to say about that, and I want to talk a little temperature for a second. So the Druid project, that's kind of the first thing that's popped up in captive breeding in the United States for a mutation, or has there been any other mutations that have popped up in captive breeding?
Well, so that didn't even pop up. So I don't want to speak for Elijah. I don't know the exact history, but I'm almost positive Elijah got that as an import, thought it was another line of Toba, like the stuff Tracy has. So he was calling it Toba for a while. We knew it was a different line. So I think he brought that animal in, or someone else imported, but that was an animal that was brought into the country when he got it. Then it wasn't until, you know, he produced animals from it, and then it wasn't until he bred them together that he made that he realized that's not a Toba. But I mean, I think that his founding animal originated out of the U.S., if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong. I'll let Elijah slap me in Chicago if I'm wrong, but I think that's right.
No, that's fair. And hey, just in case Elijah's listening, you know, we're not banging, so I'm not going to remember every story you tell me. I probably should know the answer to this because we've talked enough about it, but I might have forgot this one in this very moment. But I will say, you know, one of the comments you made, and I'm sure if he's listening right now, he's thinking the same thing I am. I think with his leucistics, with the Druids, you get all that dark pigment. You know, in our last podcast with him and Matt Minatola, you know, I kind of mentioned putting batik into that project for the leucistic to see what it do to the pattern. And he said he thought about it too, because me and that guy are kind of on the same wavelength. If you're telling me that wrought iron could possibly add some more dark pigment based on your super matrices, maybe in that leucistic form, it could completely change that gray that starts coming through as they start growing.
I have no doubt that that's a possibility for sure. And when the first time when Elijah first popped out, you know, made the super, and then I really started looking at those Druid animals. You know, I think so many species, the genes are the same, you know, across species. You know, so when I look at the Druids, I go, man, it reminds me of a fireball python. It does the exact same thing that a fire does. That's kind of what the Druid reminds me of. So it's which anyone that remembers fire way back in the day, you know, Barchak used to call that freaking a codominant hypo, because it's a hypo-ish look. So, it's a hypo-ish, fire-ish kind of look is what that Druid does. And so I'm interested to get the Druid just by itself into wrought iron, because if you can fade some of that dark color, but still I think you get a super high contrasted animal with it. So that in itself is cool. But then, to make a wrought iron, you know, what's he called? I don't even remember what he calls the super druid. Did he name that thing? I
Mm,
should get slapped for that too, probably.
we might have called it leucistic in the beginning, but when the pigments started coming in, maybe there was thoughts about him changing the name. But I think it started just saying leucistic, I believe.
Yeah. Oh well, I mean, hey, Lucy, Super Mojave Lucy balls have all kind of pigment that comes in when they get 4 or 5 years old. I have them that look like they're full of dirt and purple heads, and so I don't necessarily mean that it can't be a leucistic just because it's got some.
Well, super fire boa constrictors, the leucistic, that gets all that black pigment that starts coming through, colorful scales over time. There's a few projects like that. I was trying to make comparisons earlier to them, but I couldn't remember them all. But I know there are some leucistics in different species that gain some kind of color pigment.
The cow and retic.
Cow and retic, yeah. That was a fascinating one based on the pairing. That genetically made no sense to me making the cow.
Why is that?
You guys don't know shit about retics. Never mind. I don't even know why I try to say a retic thing.
No, because I know
the making of the cow, when you look at the ingredients, would you have thought it would make a cow?
I mean, did you think that with highways and gravels when you saw those two animals?
Well, no, I didn't think they'd make an ivory either when I saw a yellow belly, but
I don't know. I mean, you've had years of ball pythons to prepare you for the retic, so I don't know why you're shocked.
Well, not. Okay, what's the pair to make a cow?
Huh?
What do you pair to make a cow?
Like a phantom and a.
Is it sunfire?
Ooh, no, I don't think it's sunfire. I think that makes a black. The sunfire, I think. It's
okay.
And we're sounding stupid, Dave. Let's quit talking about.
Well, you own a bunch of retics. I thought this would be easy for you because I thought I knew, but I don't know anymore.
I don't want to sound dumb because I know I don't fucking know.
Yeah. Well, that's right. I just, I'm feeling William out because really there's this space in my brain that I just can't fill with information, and that's William for me. So, let me give you an example. Hey, William, I really want to talk about Borneo shorttails right now. Who was the guy that I interviewed, I believe, out of Illinois that does Borneo shorttails? Perfect.
Come on.
I appreciate that. I mean it because I suck with names. So when I did the podcast with him, when we talked about how you keep these bloods and Borneos cooler, my immediate question was, well, what do you incubate your eggs at? And he said 88 to, I think, 90 degrees. Now, the fact that the hotspot in his containers were even cooler than what he was keeping his incubator at, I thought that was a little peculiar. Do you think we're incubating them? Like, how low have we tried taking a blood python egg to see if it still hatches? And wouldn't it be funny if the longer they're in the egg, the faster they get into a shed cycle, as in their first shed?
It's possible. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if we've done that yet or not, determine what that lower limit is. But I mean, for years I lowered my incubator down until I got it to 87.5, and almost everything incubated fine in there. And that was when I had those issues with bloods that I told Tracy. I said, Tracy, I've been hatching blood pythons for 8 years by that point in time, and they've all incubated in my incubator right next to all the other stuff that's been in that incubator for 15 years. I don't understand the issue, but hey, it may be an issue here. But it's funny you bring that up because I was talking to someone else last year about the eye issue in palmetto corn snakes, and once again, I stumble across someone that's completely in the colubrid world, and that's it. Tells me, hey, we think we figured out how to solve the bulging eyes in male palmettos. And I was like, oh, what's that? Well, incubate them, a lot cooler. And I'm like, here we go. It's just a common theme, spreads across everything. So I'm not 100% sure that, if you have any issue, your first go-to with an animal, if you have any issue, first go-to should be, hey, cool down mom or cool down freaking incubation, and just let them incubate a little bit longer. It's not that big a deal. So I've got some palmetto clutches. I got 2 of them this year that I'm incubating cooler than I normally do. I'm trying to keep those things at about 82 degrees if I can. Versus 85 I normally incubate at, to see if that solves the problem.
So I'll be straight with you. When it comes to corn snakes, I got with Jeff Sr. at JMG, I got all that stuff years ago. And then about 4 or 5 years ago, I bought I think I bought 20 or 30 female triple het or double het palmettos for like $30 a piece because the kid just didn't want them anymore. They were pets to him. Well, they were being sold as pets. Well, long story short, I make a ton of palmettos every year. I get eye issues, but I also don't incubate them. I just put them on top of a rack in a baby room, and I bet you they go anywhere from 76 degrees to 82 degrees.
So I think that's why you don't have problems. So when I say incubate, mine are incubated on the floor underneath a rack in my ball python room. They're not actually in the incubator. They're incubating, but you know, I used to keep them in a rack and they'd sit about 85. So now I'm trying to keep them at 82. My problem is I don't really have a good stable 82 degree, 80 degree area in my building. You know, I've got a colubrid room that's got Spangleri and diamond pythons and stuff in there. That room's like 75 degrees. You know, my office is 73. In the dead of summer, like right now, you know, in the dead of winter, my main ball python room will be 78 degrees, 79. But in the dead of summer, like now, it's probably 84 degrees in there. So on the floor, they still might be 83. So it's hard for me to find 82 degrees, 80 to 82 somewhere, but that's what I would love to have for all my colubrids. I think they come out stronger. You know, they take an extra week to incubate, but they come out stronger, all yolk absorbed and feed better and do better. And I just don't have a good 80-degree spot. But I'm betting you if you don't have a lot of problems with your palmettos, that's why. Because you're incubating them at the ideal range for that issue not to exacerbate. And you won't. So
I could be lucky because I'm half-assing it, and I didn't want to buy an extra incubator, pretty much.
Yeah, see, there's benefits to half-assing it.
Yeah, you never know. Hey, we all figured out our own way. So, William, what do you got? You got something on tip of your tongue? I don't want to take all your topics away from you.
Well, you want to talk about this topic? Because I got a little bit to say.
Well, no, I always want to hear what you have to say, man. Jump in and talk, buddy.
I don't like interrupting you guys. You guys are the pioneers here. I don't want to.
Not pioneers.
You know, Tim, I listened to you back in Reptile radio days. You're getting up there, man.
Hey, I wake up in the morning. I know I'm getting a little older. I can fucking feel it, but I still don't think I don't look at myself as a pioneer by any stretch.
You're a pioneer to your guys.
Anyway, I'll take it.
But I know people have done cooler temps with carpet pythons and ball pythons, and it seems like if you drop them, one guy did it on accident. He forgot to turn his incubator back on. So I think it coasted 80 to 82, and the babies came out super late and were horrible to get started feeding. So I think there is a threshold of too low. Pythons being a little fucked up. But you know what I have heard, and this was like I think it was Nick and Justin's carpet python book. They took data loggers and put it in clutches. Yeah. And the carpet python, particularly. Well, I don't think they did diamonds. I think it was Brettles, Southern Coastals. Basically just a species that actually, can't think of the word now. I'm drawing a blank on it. Creates its own heat because not all pythons create heat. They shake, but they don't actually create heat. I think it's just an instinct just to shiver. Rather, it's to maintain humidity, but it doesn't actually create heat. There's only a few pythons that can actually do it. And it's pythons found in cooler climates like your Burmese, your Bolinai, your diamonds, a lot of your South African rocks and stuff, but they'll have a wide range like the eggs will. They can go, I think Nick or Justin, anywhere from 92 to 84 degrees. You know, the fluctuation from the temperature range for the eggs when the female maternally incubated them. Yeah, that's what the data log or the graph said. Or something.
I got to go back and read that because I was hoping to get my first diamond python eggs this year, but I don't know if the males are still a little smaller or age. I mean, I think my animals are 6 years old, but it's the first year I paired them all, but I didn't get anything this year, so I'll try again next year. I think I'll have some better success next year.
Can you just stick them outside where you live, or do you get a little too cold too long?
No, it just gets too hot.
Oh,
yeah. Oh, I mean, I fight. So I got a room with all my colubrids in it, and I just keep the diamonds in the room with the colubrids, and of course my Spangleri are in there. So that room normally, I brumate everything because it's easier for me because I'm sharing two of the walls of that room with the exterior. So I do use the coldest part of our year to help me. So I put everything historically into brumation in the week between Christmas and New Year's. And then I pull everything out the first week of April. So, but that room will normally hover anywhere between 52 and 55 degrees, depending on how cold it is outside. And it'll get a little colder than 52 if like we get into freezing and we stay freezing for, 5 or 6 days in a row, it'll get a little bit cooler. So, for the most part, they were sitting at about 52, 53, 54 degrees in there. I'd like to get them a little cooler than that, actually. And I actually have someone was asking me that this year. I've got a little wine refrigerator in that brumation room that in the middle of brumation for the middle 6 weeks, I put my Louisiana milk snakes in there to get them even colder. Because I'll bring them down to 46 degrees. But that refrigerator is not big enough to get all my diamonds in there. So I might be able to put one of them in there. I might try it this year. Just put one of them in there at 46 and see what happens. But like probably about 5 weeks into brumation, I'll go in and check everybody's water, and then I'll pull my Louisiana milk snakes and I'll put them in that refrigerator and leave them in there for about 6 weeks. So they almost kind of get a step down after they've been brumating, and then a step back up about 3 weeks before I pull everyone out. I'll put them back in their cage in the room. So they get like about a 6 to 8 degree jump up. And then that last week, we warm them up every 2 or 3 degrees a day until they get back up to normal. So that seemed that the first year I did that with them was the first year I got production out of them. So I wouldn't mind doing that with diamonds. I may have to get a bigger refrigerator to put in there. Who knows?
Shit.
Is the refrigerated method still being used commonly in the hobby? Because I remember that being a very old school way of doing things.
I have no clue, but I mean, hey, I have one because I've used it for certain situations and it works for me. So I do. And I mean, hey, I bought that thing for Louisiana milk snakes, a species that, I've never sold a single animal. I made no money off that. It's purely just because I find it fascinating to breed that thing. So I spent a bunch of money on a refrigerator just for those, and I've never made a nickel off those snakes yet. Hopefully soon I will.
How's the project going? Just in general. How's it
Well,
going?
for anyone that knew, I had an animal that I thought might be a mutation. So I had what, anyone that would look at it would tell you was a calico. So it was a calico Louisiana milk snake male. I bred that to, wild caught female. It took me 5 years before I figured out how to breed them and get production. And then I've produced 3 good clutches and 2 bad clutches from that female. But the first year, I don't remember all the numbers. I have to go back and look. But the first year, I got production. 1 animal survived out of that. Those things are tiny, so getting them to eat is a pain in the ass. And they like to eat baby anoles. And then that's the other problem with my brumation technique. I brumate so late that by the time mine hatch, you can't find a baby anole because they've all grown too much. So that leads into some more of that story. But anyway, the first clutch, 1 survived. I still have that, and it was a male. And I think the reason why that one survived is, it was the only one that got onto pinky mice, but pretty much right off the bat. It ate I've got some multicolored mice that produce really tiny babies. And so I keep a couple of tubs of those things just for the simple fact that they produce tiny babies for my spotted pythons, for Louisiana milks, for tricolor hogs, for that kind of stuff. So anyway, I had 1. Second year, I got a clutch, and I want to say there was like 6 in that clutch. And that's the year I said, well, I'm going to see who I can get on mice, and whoever can't get on mice, I'm going to brumate them if I can't get them on there, because I know they'll survive the brumation because, they'll be cold. And then when I pull them out of brumation, that's when I'll have baby anoles. So that next year's production won't be ready, but I'll have food for those. That was the year I put those 5 Louisiana milks in brumation. And for whatever reason that year, I got the room cold and I left the heat tape on all the racks in there. And I didn't go back in that room for about 5 or 6 weeks to check on everybody. And all of those snakes had died because they were still metabolizing because they were too warm. They weren't super warm, but warm enough that they didn't shut down. So I lost all of them but 1. That one from the second clutch, I still have. That's a male. So my original calico was a male, and both of his offspring that survived were both males. So I'm like, this is not any good. The third year, I got all slugs from the female, so I didn't get any production. And then last year I produced, I think, 7. And I got all 7 of them to eat, and I was all freaking excited. Found a new trick. I won't divulge at this point in time. Found a new trick, got them all eaten. And then slowly those things just died for whatever reason. Who knows? They're still kind of fragile. I think one time I'd let somebody run out of water and one or two may have died as a result of that, which sucked. And but anyway, fast forward, I got one left out of that. And that animal's doing great. I don't sex those things till they're like a year old because it's too freaking hard. They're so goddamn tiny. So I don't know if this is a female. And then last year, the male calico died. So hopefully this is a female. If not, then, I proved that he's not dominant, obviously. I've never made one of him in any of the offspring that I've made. So it's recessive, if anything. So now I got two males that are 100% het, if anything. And if this last animal I have from him is not a female, then I got to go the route of making some pos hets with these and growing those up. But at any rate, so then this year I used one of the males that I've been growing up to put in with mom, and he didn't get the job done. So I don't know if he's still too young or what. So we'll see. But hopefully next year we'll get some production for mom. And I've had mom now for, I think, probably 10 or 11 years. She was an adult when I got her. I think some of those things may only live into their teens. So I don't know how much longer she's got. So hopefully I can get something. And if not, then I gotta go find another wild caught female somewhere to work the project again. But it's one of those, it's fun. I've only bumped into like two other people in the state or in the country that even breed a MORPH, Louisiana milk. So, I mean, there's almost no one doing it. So it's just fun. But I've had tons of people want to buy that stuff. I got a list of all kinds of people that want it. So hopefully I can get, a little bit smaller, a larger collection of that stuff and start producing them. And it's another one of those too. I'm really fascinated to breed a pair of F1s together because I have a sneaky hunch that by the time I get to F2 or F3 animals, they will more readily feed on mice right out of the egg. And I think they become an easier species to feed and keep once you get further away from wild animals. I think that might apply to a lot of wild stuff once you get into second, third generation filial stuff, feeding problems go away. And I've had that theory with bull and I, that I don't think bull and I are going to be that hard to breed in the future. When we start breeding F2s together, I just have this feeling they're going to become a little bit easier to breed once they've, acclimated to captivity. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but I have a feeling of that.
I think you're right. I think that's kind of been across the board with a lot of species. A lot of were dubbed like ball pythons were dubbed impossible at one point. Now look at them. Common species out there. But you were talking about what was it? Wouldn't you think? Because so I know what you're talking about. Dave and Tracy's. I don't know if you necessarily say they proved it, but they said it was pretty substantial proof on like spotteds and children pythons, since they're innately gecko eaters or lizard eaters in the wild as neonates. And they said, after multiple generations, if you keep back ones that are more inclined to eat pinkies, they said they'll switch the pinkies real easy. Hog noses are a great example. They naturally eat frogs, and now you can get them eating pinkies right out of an egg.
For years, so I've produced spotted pythons probably for, 6 or 7 years now. And I can't remember having a problem getting a spotted python to eat. But for years, all I ever heard was these things are just horrible. Right. Can't get them to eat, and they're a pain in the ass. And I go, well, I don't know what I'm doing right, but I don't have a problem. And, I was kind of bummed this year. Actually, I got 27 eggs this year from my 2 spotted girls total. And I was stoked. I was going to have a ton of shit. Well, one of the clutches, 14 eggs, the whole clutch went bad, which is weird. I don't know what happened there. And then the other clutch of 13 ended up hatching 10. And then one of them died with a hard belly. Actually, I was in Paris and I came back home and it was dead, which kind of sucked. But, that clutch right there, right before I left to go to Paris, I set those guys up. And so they had probably been set up for like 3 days. And I went and offered every one of them one of those little tiny live pinkies, and nobody ate. And I was like, that's okay. They're only like less than 2 weeks old. It'll be fine. Got back from Paris. That one was dead. So I had 9 left. Offered all 9 of them tiny pinkies live. That week I got back. Every single one of them ate. The second time they ever saw a meal, they all ate. And I was like, man, again, I don't know what I'm doing right, but I've never had problems with any of my spotteds taking pink. As long as they're tiny, they're little pinkies. On occasion, I'll get a couple a year that won't eat alive for their first meal. I have to give them frozen thawed because they just don't want. They get scared of it moving. But I haven't had problems with mice on mine at all.
Yeah, I've lost so many baby carpets and Antaresia from just not pre-killed, but defrosted pinkies. You just leave in the tub, or you leave unscented or something. You know, for whatever reason, they're terrified of live, or if you dangle it in front of their face, it freaks them out. But if you leave it in there, they just go over whenever they want to and eat it. So I totally understand that. But I kind of wonder though, especially with as fast as herpetoculture is advancing, and I'm starting to see more and more of them, because we deem the non-pinky eaters as weak, but it's just we're not feeding them what they want. But they're starting to become more and more lizard feeder people breeding like anoles and geckos feeders. And I kind of wonder, just going that route, just because that seems so much faster than weaning out the pinky eaters. And frankly, like I get tired of pinky eaters because it's just, I hate feeding pinkies in any species. I'm talking rat pinks, mice pinks, ASF pinks, anything that has milk, because whatever reason, any python that eats it with milk in their system, it just explosive diarrhea.
And so I've said that for years. I never thought about the whole milk thing until you said it, but I always thought that some of it was their poop wouldn't hold together because there's no hair.
Yeah, I think that's
ball pythons for years, especially if I had, a male that I was power feeding, quote unquote, and trying to, I would alternate. If everyone wanted to get it on rats, they always did. Well, I'd give it a pinky rat, and then its next meal was going to be a small mouse or a hopper mouse to give it hair. And I found that if I introduced some hair into the diet, I didn't get that poop as bad. But you're probably right. It probably has a lot to do with the milk as well, I'm sure. That's doing that. But I thought a lack of hair was a big piece of that as well. So I would always alternate when I could.
I think you're right too. I think hair, I've noticed people would feed like you would feed like a pinky mouse, but then you feed like a few day old ASF with a little bit of fuzz on it, and it seems to hold its poop together better. Yeah. I'm sure that definitely has something to do with it too. But I've just been some species though, like I have 11 baby wheat belts, and I have another 11 baby wheat belts hatching Stimson's pythons, and those are still relatively new in the hobby. And goddamn, they're horrible.
Yeah,
they want to eat. Yeah, they want lizards, or they want unscented lizard, or I'm going to try quail. I'm going to see if birds can get them going, but yeah, they can be a little frustrating.
I'll talk to you offline. I got a trick if you haven't tried yet. It might work, but
I'm
I'll tell you about it later.
Yeah. Oh, this sounds bad.
I just wanted to. Some secrets you got to keep in your back pocket every now and again,
Okay, I got you.
Well, I got two things on these secrets. But first off, actually, let's go to the first thing. So Louisiana milk snakes. You're one of, let's say, 2 breeders, it sounds like, and you've now figured out a way to better the species by feeding them with the new trick you have. Why are you such a selfish son of a bitch to not let the other 2 guys know what you're doing? Like, are you doing something weird over there? Like,
I did not tell him what I'm doing. As a matter of fact, guy reached out to me this week and asked. So I told him. Of course, he was asking about breeding. So I gave him. I kind of spoke about my trick on breeding.
Okay.
Little trick. I'm not 100% certain that's necessary, but one other thing that I'm doing, I'm keeping in my back pocket. But I was like, hey, you got to produce eggs first. Get that, and then we'll talk about getting stuff feeding. But I mean, to be honest, those animals, I pretty much said, I don't think I would sell one of those animals till it's a year old anyway. So kind of back to what Will was saying. I know a lot of people don't want to feed non-rodents to animals. And I understand it because the people you're selling to may not have access to what you're feeding it. But that just means no problem. That means you have to feed it what you think it wants as a baby and then grow it for a while and convert it. The problem is most people don't have the patience to do that. They want to sell it. Oh, 3 meals, I need to sell it. I need to make some money, get it out of my hair. So in the case of this, I don't mind. And I have, I've got a freezer full of baby anoles from last year. that I'll use. And I've found that a lot of mine, if I, try all the tricks, can't get them to do anything, I'll just defrost out on a knoll, warm it up, stick it in there, and they'll eat it. So I'm not beyond feeding them a knolls, because I know eventually once they get some size, they will eat, they will eat a pinky mouse once they get some size on them. But, I mean, it may mean I have to keep them for a year, work with them for a year before I sell those things. So some of those weird species, that's it, but you have to there's some people that aren't going to, that especially, and not to beat up on them, I breed ball pythons too, but, the people that come into the ball python market, that's their introduction. And then they continue down that path and, get stuck in watching the market, especially now on social media, and going, hey, you produce animals, and hey, I give people now that sell them right out of the egg without feeding them. And we know they're pretty easy to get started, but there's a lot of lack of patience in the ball python industry, in my opinion.
That's fine, and we can get into that. We only have 5 minutes, so I can't even get into the ball python industry on that. But I got one thing I'm going to throw at both of you guys, and then William, we're going to throw a wrap-up question in there. This is something I stole from MJ that he does. Now it's ours. And it's going to be for Tim. You got to ask Tim the question. But one thing that I thought about when you guys were talking, when I was by Travis Whistler's table, I don't know if it was a conversation I had directly with him or if it was me overhearing him talk, but Stimson's pythons. He talked about most of his animals, he put a year of work into them before selling them, and they were on his table for $200, and that's kind of like a labor of love to me if you're going to put a full year into a baby that size. So I wouldn't necessarily call that a profitable species unless you can get them going right away. William, you made a comment about runny poops, and you thought it was milk related, and I do believe that because there's certain things about boa feeding, I think about that too. Now, the question I have, what do you think the difference is between a lizard in the wild structurally and I just don't know what's keeping it glued together. Like, you know what I mean? How about this? You think all the scales and bone on a lizard is keeping that poop good?
I think
And just that little bit of fur is kind of that calcium or whatever it breaks down to be in the digestive system?
I think that's what it is, because, as soon as MJ, he was feeding his green pythons geckos, and they went from explosive poop to hard poop, I've seen it in the fusion Antaresia species, As soon as you transition over to a more developed prey hive, it seems to hold its poop or make a normal looking poop anyways.
Well, the other piece of that too, to interject, and I don't remember, I just heard this recently, and I don't remember the context of how the story came up, but I know it was someone talking about not the rodents diet, not the diet of the snake.
Oh, you're talking about, I bet you're talking about Ron St. Pierre talking about feeding fruit to his rats before his emeralds?
Maybe. Yeah, but it's the diet you're feeding to the food you're feeding to the snake may be the issue. So, that could be a big piece of it. If you were to go catch wild rats and wild rodents and feed to your snake, you might not have the same problem.
So lizards don't have hair, though.
Oh, no, they don't.
It's more the bone structure?
I think it's calcium, scales. I think it's all of it.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Scales are a type of keratin. So I'm sure that's what holds in the calcium too, is holding poop and giving it some sort of structure. And like I said, I think milk does play a role in it to an extent, because even us mammals, at a point, we're not supposed to be able to drink milk.
No, hey, if either one of y'all have had a baby, and I got a grandson, so I got to experience it again recently, when they're drinking milk, that is liquid that comes out of their rear end, So,
I'm just assuming that's just one extra on top of the pinky.
Oh, yeah.
Super underdeveloped,
For sure.
to fully developed lizard. So, like I said, I'm seeing more people breed food, so potential market for that, I don't know. I guess you'd have to get them cheap enough, and then shipping's ridiculous too. So yeah, I don't whatever. You'd almost better off doing it yourself, and I don't know how many people want to start gecko colonies or anole colonies or whatever, So
I know some people that have started pictus gecko colonies just to have feeders for other stuff.
Right? I'm thinking about it. I'm seriously considering it, because I just don't want to deal with it. I got pygmy pythons and all that. I'd rather not, because you got big hands and you try to restrain a little snake.
Oh, yeah.
Bother assist feeding at that point. If you don't do any of the tricks with my hands having to touch the back of your neck, then you're probably gonna die. So I'd rather just feed it something that naturally, well, close to naturally would eat. You know.
All right. So, William, I got to be a bad person. I don't think we have time for 2 questions, but I want one piece of advice that, well, I've repeated a piece of advice that Tim said years ago to me that I want him to finish up this episode with, and then we're going to wrap it up. But it was the advice you gave me on the logic behind buying a het sunset male, making your pos hets over the years. And the comment you made was, when you buy the visual, sometimes you're buying time less than anything. Do you want to give me that advice again? Because I always really love that advice.
I probably won't get it exactly like I said it before, but I mean, yeah, that's how I worked my sunset project, and I had recommended that some people work their monsoon project that way. Is, hey, buy a het male. It's fairly inexpensive, and then you know, produce a bunch of pos hets. And me personally, I never do anything on a grand scale like some people. So I made 12 pos het sunset girls, held them all back. And then, you know, hey, I said, when they get about 18 months old, I'll evaluate the price of a visual male. If I still don't want to pay that much, then I'll just use my het male that I have. And if I get a good deal on it, I'll buy a visual. But yeah, I mean, essentially at that point, if you buy another visual male, that's all you're doing. You're just buying the time to get you there a little bit faster. But, you know, buy that het male, make a bunch of pos hets, because you're going to have the females to be able to reproduce, you know, at least in a recessive project, those animals. So, you know, make all your hets with the cheapest way you possibly can, and then buy your homozygous male when your females are ready to go. And you're at that point, that's all you're doing. You're shuffling money around time.
So one thing fascinating about that advice you gave me 4 years ago is how different that advice is now that we have an RGI and other companies in the industry testing sheds.
Oh, for sure.
Like now it's really kind of the way to go for a lot of early investors that don't want to invest too high. And I always say, you know, buying that triple or quad head male with the technology you have given to you now, like really is a huge benefit. But, okay, guys, I know we got to keep this around 2 hours. It's all about the algorithm. So I hate to say it. I think we're going to have to come back for a part 2 on this, because I'm sure we can talk for 2 more hours.
Oh, I could probably talk forever. I don't know if anyone wants to listen to it, but I'll do it.
No, this was nice. I loved every minute of it. So, you know, let's get it out. William, why don't you go ahead and plug yourself a little bit? We're going to be doing a lot more of this. I enjoy working with you, of course. And Tim, after he's all done, once you sound off, I'll say goodbye, and we'll wrap it up to the next one.
Yep.
You can find me on TJW Exotics, my website, Instagram, Facebook, and that's it.
Okay. Tim?
Yeah, likewise for me, BaileyReptiles.com, on Instagram, Facebook. Lately, I've been not super busy over there, but I still have pages that are maintained, and that's typically easiest place to find me is those places. And of course, you know, I got a MORPH Market account, so I'm behind on populating it with everything, but check some stuff out there as well.
All right, perfect.
Definitely reach out. I'm open to answer questions. Have for years. So if you got a question, reach out. Call me. I hate typing, but if you just prefer typing, send me an email. I'll answer it.
No, for sure. And here's another thing, guys. You know, you guys follow me on Facebook or anywhere else. You know, you're going to start seeing me post these podcasts about a week early. I'm going to encourage people to get in the comments. You know, I thought this was a very unique conversation. The way William thinks is different than the way I think, which made talking to Tim way better today. So what I'm encouraging you guys to do is get in the comments leading up to these videos, make some suggestions, start some conversations. I never know where these guys are going to go. We go random with all this stuff. So the conversations leading up to this make these conversations better. So keep an eye out for me on social media. Any guest I have coming on, get in their comments when they tag me in the post. But I generally want to hear some suggestions because I love these random ass conversations. So honestly, guys, I love that episode. It was smooth. It felt great. I look forward to the next one.
No, for sure. Everybody have a good weekend. We'll see everybody at the show soon.
Very soon. All right. Well, peace out, everybody. I appreciate y'all again.
No, see you, boys.